Hey everybody, it's Noah, Editor-in-Chief here at the ARK of E Network, and it is a very special day for us here. It is May the 1st, 2020, which means it is our 3-year anniversary. That's right, we have been podcasting for 3 years, if you can believe it. So I want to send a very big thank you to any and all of our listeners, people who were there from the very beginning, people who found us along the way, shared us with their friends, rated and reviewed us on iTunes, liked anything on social media, anything that helped to grow the show. And we just appreciate your listenership in general. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming for you in year 4. On that note, I'm here to introduce Flashback Fridays, which is a new regular thing. So get excited, people. We've had a lot of podcasts over the last 3 years across several different feeds. So this is kind of an effort to consolidate some of that. And it's kind of a all-in-one package, if you will. So we're going to kick things off today with a very early episode. This was one of the first 10 podcasts that my brother Gavin and I ever recorded together. This was part of Carpenter Revisited, the first mini-series we ever did, where we explored the filmography of Mr. John Carpenter. I assume if you've listened to any episodes on this feed, you've heard us mention it before. But that feed is exclusively on our Patreon. So if you do want to go listen to it in its entirety, by all means, we would appreciate that. For as little as $1 a month, you can go to patreon.com/thearkofe and you can become a subscriber. That'll give you access to our ad-free archives and you can listen to the whole run. But, you know, if you wait, you'll definitely see more Carpenter Revisited here on Fridays occasionally, but they're going to be spaced out. We're going to try and get the Brothers Blanchard back in here as well. They've done a bunch of mini-series for us. You'll probably hear from Sunshine Mayfield from time to time. But yeah, it'll be a fun little retrospect, and I plan on doing intros for these. We'll see how that goes. This is a little awkward, always recording solo by myself, but this is an early one. Once again, it's a little rough around the edges. We were still figuring out our audio setup. I was still figuring out how to edit properly. So it's a little rough around the edges, but I think it's an interesting take considering where we started and where we're at now. Hopefully you think we've improved a little bit. But this still stands as my all-time favorite Carpenter film. It's one of my favorite episodes we did for the run, so I hope you enjoy it. Forgive, again, the different studio people. That was our very first studio. We're on our 5th or 6th now. So I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, this is Carpenter Revisited Episode 6 on The Thing.
I'm recording this because this could be the last thing I'll ever say.
Hello, and welcome to Episode 6 of Carpenter Revisited on the ARK of E Network. My name is Noah.
And my name is Gavin.
And we're the Blanchard brothers, and it's finally here, listeners. My favorite in the entire filmography of Mr. Carpenter, 1982's The Thing. I am so happy that we're here, and can't wait to jump in and discuss this one with you, brother. As I remember, this is not your number 1, which I'll forgive you for. You have Halloween up there, if I'm not mistaken.
Of course.
But this
Halloween
is your
all day.
number 2, correct? Is this your number 2?
Yeah.
Not to put you on the spot.
Before going into it, I mean, we really should have had that one that you lost. Just for reference, I don't remember where I stacked them. Going into this, I probably would say it's number 2. I don't know if that's going to change when we get to They Live Again, because They Live, for a long time, I never saw. And then when I finally got to it, I was like, oh, I like this one a lot. But I don't know if it's enough to dethrone The Thing. But yeah, it's up there.
Yeah. So we are coming off of Escape from New York, which was number 2 in the 2-picture deal with Avco Embassies. And this is going to transition us into Carpenter's first major studio effort with Universal. He's essentially a director for hire in this instance. It's not his screenplay, but he did, as I understand, bring Bill Lancaster on board, and was involved with working on it prior to being confirmed as a director. But anyways, he's working from a Howard Hawks original film, The Thing from Outer Space, as we've probably talked about before, and any casual Carpenter fan that's delved into him at all probably knows, die-hard Howard Hawks fan, probably the director that he modeled his career after or most wanted to emulate in everything he did. But he recounts a story on one of the special features that I watched. He saw the original when he was around 4 or 5, so obviously made a huge impact on
real
him.
big one.
Yeah. And so Universal decides they have this property and they want to rework it for modern audience, and they pick John Carpenter. He has proven himself thus far as, again, being a guy who can take a small budget and put every single dollar up on the screen. We talked about The Fog and how that's $1 million movie that, you could stand right up there with a lot of the summer glossy releases from the day. A lot of that has to do with the Panavision filming technique. But yeah, let's get into it a little bit. Obviously, this is one I kind of expect a lot of people, as with Halloween. If you're into Carpenter at all, I feel like you've probably delved pretty deeply into this one. But one of my favorite things about the thing is how layered it is and how many different levels it works on. So let's step back generally, and I'm gonna let you do us a little plot outline, brother.
What year is it? It's 82, right?
Yes.
Okay. The year is 1982. The location, the Antarctic.
Are you gonna do the whole thing like this?
Yeah.
Okay. Go for it.
Unbeknownst to the men of Outpost 31, there is a stranger in their midst. A stranger that they cannot tell who or what it may become. That was terrible. I'm not good at going. Basically, it's 1982. There's these group of guys in the Antarctic. They're doing research. And one day out of the blue, this crazy Norwegian fella in a helicopter chasing a gorgeous Malamute dog, he comes running up to the base, going crazy, and starts shooting. Winds up shooting one of their own in the leg and trying to kill this dog. And it's obviously the most action that's taken place at this outpost in a long time. And so after that Norwegian guy gets killed, they say, "Hey man, he's not far from here. Let's go up there and check it out." They go up and check it out, and they find out that these scientists from Norway, or the Norwegians, they uncovered something in the ice, something that had been there since the dawn of time, and they awoke something, and now that something is moved on to Outpost 31, and the rest of the film asks the question, how do I know if you're the thing?
Or you're you. It's a pretty solid setup. Thank you, brother.
R.J. McCready, helicopter pilot, U.S. Outpost 31.
Yes, much more to come on McCready. So one of the things I think is most notable about the opening, we open in space. First time for Carpenter back there since Dark Star. And we see a wonderfully constructed model of the spaceship as it crash lands. And then we get across all movies, this has got to be in your top 5, one of the greatest title screens of any movie. The burn-in effect of John Carpenter's The Thing is just, it's so impactful, grabs you from the immediate opening. I will throw a little homework at our listeners. If you've never checked out The Terror Takes Shape, it's about an hour and a half long documentary. It was on the first proper special edition release of The Thing back on DVD that Universal put out. It's been left off of some of the subsequent Blu-ray releases, but I think Shout Factory's latest one does have it back on there. They kind of put everything back together for that.
It's also got a bunch of really other good documentaries, stuff about the one called The Men of Outpost 31.
Which I've yet to watch yet, so I'm interested.
And it actually has probably I'm going to go ahead and say it, the worst version of The Thing, but it has the original broadcast, and a lot of the stuff was cut out. You can
it has
read
the TV
about
broadcast on the DVD?
on the special features.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And
the whole thing, not
the whole
just
movie.
Segments.
So
okay.
it's shot
Very
down.
cool.
It's only in 4.3. And the shittiest thing, along with kind of like Blade Runner, which we can get into talking about how that mingles with this. It has a bunch of narration. So like when they get to McCready and he's playing chess in the beginning, there's this voice that comes up, McCready, a helicopter pilot. This is this and this and this. Hopper.
Is it iconic or is it?
No, it is not
so
good
they're
at all.
Okay.
It literally is telling you everything.
Sight unseen. I hate this thing immediately because one of my favorite things about The Thing is it has this massive cast, and we're a little bit ago we talked about The Fog and how that's kind of a sprawling cast where the characters are very underwritten. This is a movie where arguably they're just as underwritten, but those actors imbue all of those characters with just like such naturalism and everything. Those guys feel lived in. They feel like they've been there, and I love that the movie doesn't take a lot of time spelling out for you like who does what the individual jobs are, or anything like that.
But that's what this narration does, because when they get to
just
Hopper,
seems like it would be so
like
clunky. But
literally,
continue.
like the scene where Hopper kills the Norwegian, it cuts as Hopper, a 30-year army man, happy to be the leader of the Pope. It's like, I don't need, like, you're telling me everything that I can surmise on my own from watching it, but it's terrible, and they cut a bunch of stuff out. It's a lot quicker.
Wow. I feel really bad for anybody who that was like their first introduction to the thing. I didn't even know that existed until you just brought it up.
Yeah, but definitely the Blu-rays got that, a bunch of really good special features with different stuff with the cast. An interview with Mick Garris and John Carpenter talking about this, which is really good. You should definitely watch it.
Yeah. So one thing I think is Terror Takes Shape, which is the documentary that I was referencing. They go into the details of how the model was built and how the burn-in effect was done. It's very interesting how they describe it. I won't try and do it justice here, but definitely check that out. It's a really awesome title treatment. The guy literally lays it all out, and then he's like, so it was really a pretty simple effect. And like he's described it, and I'm like, I still don't understand like how the hell you did that, but okay, it's awesome. Anyways, so awesome title card, and then we hear something that is a little surprising. We don't hear an iconic Carpenter score. We hear an iconic score, but it's Mr. Ennio Morricone. Again, we'll get into more detail about the production itself, but this is Carpenter working with a budget, and he kind of talked about how early on it was more out of necessity that he did the music than anything else. It was just I didn't have any money, so I
was pretty quick, and I was pretty cheap,
and so I threw my own score on stuff. But in this case, he's gladly said that he stepped aside and let a master do his score. Obviously, Morricone's incredibly tied in with spaghetti westerns and all his work with Sergio Leone. But this I would stack right up there with some of his most iconic work. And it should be noted there's additional music by Carpenter that's uncredited, and it's not really specific like what moments are him. And I wouldn't say that it's necessarily distinguishable, because it's all kind of flows together. Of the same vibe for sure. Yeah. And honestly, like Morricone's score, it feels like something Carpenter, like tonally, feels very appropriate for Carpenter, but it does have a little bit of a more broad, like orchestral feel to it. A little more of a classic, like studio sound to a score, I guess you could say. So, anyways, that brings you in. Of course, you described the husky being chased in by the chopper of Swedes, right? Swedes.
Yeah, Mac. They're Swedes.
Yeah,
they're Norwegian, Mac.
Yeah, and
they make several references to this. The fact that Kurt Russell, you really want to say them crazy Swedes, huh? Like, but no, come on, McCready.
So we have this coming in. We're introduced to McCready in that brilliant chess scene where he has the brilliant delivery of, is it cheating bitch or lying bitch to the computer?
It's cheating bitch
when it beats him.
We should know this. We just watched it, but
from the jump, Kurt Russell. I mean, this can be said in pretty much every role, but those locks, dude. He's got just one of the most luscious full heads of hair.
Oh yeah,
I've ever seen, and it is on full display in the thing, and his giant beard too. I know we've got to post your photo because you've done him as Halloween or for Halloween once, correct? Didn't you do McCready?
No, I never did.
I thought you had the chopper jacket and the big old hat. I thought you did that for 1 year.
No.
Maybe you just have an outfit that
I think I do just have an outfit. No, the only bearded guys I did was like Sons of Anarchy.
Well, we're going to have to do some cosplay then. And we can each do our McCready's because we got
from now on, we
pretty
just
full
both
beards right now.
Let's just get dressed up as the characters when we do this.
When we record,
Yeah, just
but not film it like a video cast.
No, we just literally sit here. Yeah. I can't wait for Big Trouble in Little China. I'm going to go full low pan. It's going to be great.
Full low pan. Yeah, so we're introduced to McCready from the get-go. Again, very akin to how he's established in Escape. It's just like, I just like this dude immediately. He just seems like he's not going to take any shit from anybody. He's very no-nonsense. And we work our way through the camp. And going along with, that terrible TV version that you're describing to me, I remember the first several times I watched this, and even on this rewatch, it's like, I don't know if I know every single individual character's name. Like, I know most of the big ones, but there's a solid, like, 4 or 5 in that cast that, like, I don't know what they're called. Like, I could probably, if I struggled, come up with it for you. But anyways, we get a broad introduction to everybody, and we have our old captain who gets to pull his 6-shooter and take out the Swede. Kind of initial,
Norwegian.
yeah. Excuse me, I that literally I was not
I'm just
trying
gonna
to
call
make
you
a joke
McCready
there.
for the rest
Yeah,
of
I
this
was not
fucking
trying to make a
podcast.
joke there, but I think it's interesting. I can kind of branch off and talk about this for a little bit. From that point, it kind of seems like, hey, this like older dude, maybe he's gonna be your kind of like lead protagonist. Like he stepped up. He seems like kind of like the dude in charge and everything. And apparently, when they were originally conceiving it, when Lancaster and Carpenter were kind of initially working on it, this was pre Kurt Russell being directly involved with it. The approach was to have more of a general ensemble where there would be no kind of inkling of like, this is kind of your dude.
Yeah.
And apparently, of course, he had just worked with Russell on New York, and just as friends, they were discussing like, hey, I'm working on this remake of the thing. There's this character, and apparently just kind of organically started talking about this just as buddies because he's not attached at this point. And at a certain point, Carpenter's like, well, do you, how's your schedule looking? Like, do you want to take this on with me? Like, you kind of helped co-create this character. And apparently, like, once he was attached, there was a little bit more of a structure to the screenplay where it's like, you kind of know from the jump that McCready's kind of your guy that you are going to be with maybe for a little while. But that's what's so interesting when we get further into the movie, when we start playing around with, well, is he the thing? Does it matter? Because half the people there think he is. Like, there's that whole standoff. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that, like, as you're being introduced to all the characters, you're not really sure, like, what the levels of anybody are. You're not sure, who's a higher ranking officer, except for the dude who steps up in the very opening.
I mean, he's the only like armed person there. Like he is not a scientist, and it's really weird that like you have the obvious scientists, and you have Kurt Russell who's the helicopter pilot. You have the guy who's like the security officer, police guy. But like, what does Childs, David Keith, Keith David,
Yeah, not really sure what Childs does.
What does Childs do? What is? I mean, I know T.K. Carter's character. I cannot.
Yeah,
can't think of his name.
Windows is like the radio guy.
Yeah.
Dude with
Which
glasses.
did you catch the Men of the Outpost thing? Like apparently halfway through shooting that, he just said, "John, I think I want everybody to just call me Windows." It's like because these are all like New York actors who studied at like Juilliard and shit like that, and so John just goes, "Hey guys, he wants you all to call him Windows from now on," and so they called him Windows. And the guy who plays what's the dude that's getting high all the time? What is his name?
Oh, the one who's he's always watching Price is Right.
Yeah.
No, he's one of my favorites too.
But anyway, he remembers being like, "What the fuck is this kid doing? Like, call him Windows? What do you do?"
Windows.
But and then another crazy story, just to get on that from there. I didn't notice it until like he brought it up. But apparently, right after Keith David got this, he got in a car wreck and fucked his hand up. So for the first half of the movie, there's an obvious attempt for him to hide his hand. And they show this scene where he's watching The Price is Right. He rolls a joint, watches The Price is Right. Keith David's laying there, but his left hand is out of shot. Then when he like kind of peeks around the corner whenever Blair's going crazy, his left hand is always not on screen. So that's a really good one to watch for neat stuff, because they talk about that, and they talk about the time they almost all died in a whiteout. Like the bus they were taking from the base camp up to go shoot, like going around a corner, and they just hit a whiteout, and so like they all stopped, and Kurt Russell like instantly jumped up to the front of the bus and was like, "Everybody slide," and they like all got down and said, "All right, one by one, get over here and let's shift the weight." And like literally they almost all died on the way to the set. Like I think that the isolation plays into it, but I also know that they kept most of those guys, and not Kurt, but most of the supporting cast. They had 2 weeks of rehearsal for them, which Carpenter said like he had never done before and probably would never do again. But I think what you're talking about with everything feeling so
he makes
fleshed out and real was because they had that time to be together, to get to know one another, and then they just got to go play. They weren't worried about like their character, their direction, what they were going to do. They'd all been together for a while.
He talks about that a good bit in the Terror Take Shape doc that I watched, and how it was the longest period of pre-production that he'd ever had before or since, and how that was just completely invaluable. And from the actor's perspective, Charlie Hallahan, who plays Norris, he talks about how that period of time of like getting to run through the script and like kind of bond with the guys and everything before they actually went out and started shooting this thing was essential, because they had to be on point and know what they were doing, because once they got there, this became an effects movie and everything was on the time clock of when the effects were working, when they weren't, how long it took you to reset up after, a failed attempt. And we'll get more. I got tons to say about Rob Bottin and his contribution to the film. But yeah, that pre-production period, I think, is a huge part of why this movie is as successful. And getting into those little details that you can look for, there, it's so claustrophobic and does have so many different characters at play. It's one of those things that the more times you rewatch it, you start to notice little threads of like when certain characters are missing, where there's tiny moments of mystery to be left for, like, well, what's this guy doing right now? And it just all adds to that constant unease of like, we're with these characters, but we don't know what's going on in the rest of this camp. And the sheer number of guys that we know are up there, it's like, half of them could be this thing, one of them could be this thing. And the way that the movie plays with that is just so enjoyable. Again, I can't get that TV cut out of my head. The idea of taking all of that, like that layer of it, and kind of removing some of it by defining who these characters are and spelling everything out for you.
Not to mention, it's in 4.3. It is not in widescreen.
Yes, and this
the
is
scene where they're looking at the Norwegian running in. It's just two people, not the entire like four that were standing there.
And this is
It's
a
ridiculous.
gorgeous Panavision movie with some of the best matte paintings like achieved as of that time by a gentleman who worked with Alfred Hitchcock on like The Birds and tons of other stuff. And yeah, to imagine that you would cut that off by messing with the aspect ratio is just like that's so not the way to watch this movie. So we move into the camp, and we've had this event, as you described. They go out to the Norwegian camp to figure out what's been going on, and they find something in the ice that is just like, okay, what the hell are we dealing with at this point? And they bring back some of the remains. They start doing tests and stuff. And we kind of slowly build that narrative of them figuring out what this thing is actually and what it's capable of. And, MacReady seems pretty quick on the uptake to begin with, like accepts it from the jump the second it's kind of laid out to him. He's like, all right, this is the situation, this is what we're dealing with. And some of the other guys, whether they're playing it this way because they are in fact the thing or not, which again is so brilliant about the movie, but there's definitely some others who are like just can't quite wrap their heads around it until it's like staring them in the face.
Which will stare them in the face in probably the worst but greatest scene in the movie. Only worse because it deals with puppy dogs, and I don't like when puppy dogs get hurt.
Yes.
Which I don't think any of them did on set.
I feel like that's definitely an intense one for any animal lover to watch. But
yeah,
basically the stealth intruder invader, the way that the thing has chosen to infiltrate the space is through the dog in the opening, and of course
which is smart as fuck.
We're like, why the hell are they shooting at this poor little dog? And it's like, no, that's the thing you need to be looking out for. So he's paired up very early on with, it's Bert, correct? Clark, excuse me. Clark is the dog wrangler, who from the jump we're just kind of on track. He's a little bit more of a loner, like doesn't seem to interact with the rest of the dudes as much, and so we're kind of on edge by him to begin with. And the dog is sent into a kennel with the rest of the troop, if you will. And we're treated to our first of just an array of amazing visual effects. And I would jump in and talk about Rob Bottin right here, except for the first shots that we see, not a Rob Bottin effect. Mr. Stan Winston of Alien fame actually came in to work on that first first puppet that you see with the kind of lumped and the dog head that twirls out towards you, which is actually a hand puppet. Again, watch this documentary. The details on the effects and the behind the scenes are just, invaluable. It's pretty awesome. So apparently Bottin, dealing with all of this effects work and post and everything, needed to alleviate just a little piece of it. And so Stan Winston came in, worked on this. But then what we do see through the rest of that, see all the other like transformation, the flower kind of head thing with teeth in it, that's all Bottin. The arms that pull it into the rafters.
Yeah, see, and I always wondered, and I'd been forever since I watched that documentary, but that does make a lot of sense now, because I do feel like that first one is not necessarily the same look and feel as the rest, but that does lend to the idea that it can be literally anything. And things from other worlds, other humans, all meshed into one.
That to me is where they truly like cracked the code on this movie as a remake. Carpenter talks about how in the original, he essentially boils down to like a Frankenstein monster. He's just this big, broad, imposing force or whatever. And there's vague references to like, he's essentially like a vegetable person. He can replicate himself, and like, there's aspects of him imitating things, but nothing like what they come up with in the context of that. And apparently a lot of that was Bottin bringing that to the table of like, well, I had this idea of like, what if it's a bunch of different things? What if what we see as it's trying to emulate whatever it's trying to emulate is everything that it's ever been? And that could be anything, because we presume that this entity has been across the galaxy, across dimensions, like other worlds, other planets. And so it could look like anything. And what you get from that is just some of the most spectacular, imaginative, creative effects work. And like most of it's horribly grotesque, but it's so like so well made and crafted and photographed that it's so compelling to look at. And the actors talk about like coming in to this the effects shop and seeing just like works in progress and like just being absolutely blown away by it. And yeah, so Bottin apparently, along with the storyboard artist, whose name escapes me at the moment, but apparently came from the world of comic books. And so there's you can find a lot of these online, and some of them are featured in the documentary we were discussing. But they have these great storyboards for all the major effect sequences, and apparently they just kind of collaborated together and dreamed up all of this crazy stuff and brought it back to Carpenter, and he was like, great, do you know how to do any of this? And Rob Bottin was like, no, but I'll figure it out, basically. Essentially, writing a check that at that point he might have not been able to cash. This, again, it absolutely amazes me. This kid is 21, 22 years old when he's working on this movie. Huge Universal picture, like, probably, like, as far as he's concerned, infinite budget as far as effects go. And what he delivers, again, I don't think... It's hard to think of things even from the day that top it for pure just spectacle. All of those effects just really, really stick with you because they're so batshit. They're just like, who would ever think of that? And we'll get into the remake in a little while, but
you've never seen anything like it then or since.
Yes. And with the remake, again, them going full digital with it, you would think that would open up the possibilities to be even more imaginative and crazy with what you come up with, but it seemed to have the reverse effect where it's just
I didn't like it at all.
Yeah. And again, that seeing like what would be achievable if you approached it with practical effects today, approaching that same technique, because he even talks about in the documentary, how he watches it now and he sees like, oh, I could do that better today, or I would have done this slightly differently and everything, like criticizing his own work. And it's like other people watch this and it's held up as like this, it doesn't get any better than this for horror effects. And so, yeah, Bottin's collaboration, cannot be denied in this movie. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about this overall is Carpenter, when he, finally had risen to this state and had a budget at his command, was working for a major studio, he aligned himself with just the best part. He brings along Dean Cundey, who he's worked with beforehand and has been essential for establishing what a Carpenter movie looks like. So he brings him along, but he gets Rob Bottin, who he's worked with on The Fog. He played Blake and did some of the visual effects there, and gives this kid a shot, essentially, and it paid off in dividends. Apparently, it was a really rough shoot because of some of those effects and like trying to figure it out on the spot. But it's like some of this stuff had never been done before, conceived before. So, they went through all sorts of things with lighting the set on fire sometimes because of just the toxic fumes that some of this stuff was made out of. There's all sorts of great like on-set stories for that stuff. But yeah, getting back, I guess we'll jump a little bit more back into the plot. Once it is established, every principal character sees the incident with the dog, so like we all are on the same page that something fucked up is going on here, something otherworldly is happening, and basically, through doing some DNA analysis on the remains and some like for their day, they're rudimentary but pretty cool like computer effects that are essentially serve as like awesome exposition that kind of spell out for you. This is what this thing does. It takes you over at a cellular level, imitates you.
Every
and
piece of it is a whole of
there.
it. Yeah.
Yes. And so that's kind of laid out for us because I think again it doesn't feel clunky to me or like pandering at this point because I feel like when it was made to really get people to wrap their heads around like what they're seeing and what this thing is supposed to be, you needed a little bit more context of trying to like kind of talk you through what it was. And I feel like it would have been really easy to just be like, oh fuck it, it's a monster movie. Like, but I like all of the kind of like pseudoscience surrounding it.
Yeah, and it works because they are scientists. Like, if you don't have that, then I don't believe that that's a bunch of scientists, quote unquote, up in the Arctic doing this research. Which none of them call each other doctor. That's the weird thing. None of them is ever referred to as a doctor, but yet they're all scientists at this outpost up here, doing whatever. And I think that the explanation and the special effects for explaining what it can do, how it can replicate all that, I think it's kind of it alleviates the need to like ask questions down the road of, well, why did it do this? Why do that? Well, because it can do anything. Doesn't matter. It's not necessarily you're envisioning your worst nightmare, but whenever you see anything from the thing, it doesn't take away from it because you're like, well, yeah, it could do that.
Yeah.
It establishes the rules very early, which is something we talked about in the fall. We didn't know the rules.
Yeah.
But here we know exactly what it can do.
There's a great moment in the documentary that I keep referencing. Again, that's Terror Takes Shape. But Carpenter talks about finally seeing the completed effect of Norris's head dropping off the table, turning into a spider-legged monster, and walking away. And he says, like, that's the moment when he knew, like, he had it, basically, because he didn't want people to get to the theater and be laughing at a dude in a rubber suit. And he said that was the moment he knew he had it because it's like, regardless, like nobody's gonna laugh at this thing because you've never seen it. And yes, you could say, oh, it's goofy, it's like it's a spider-leg monster or whatever, but you can't believe what you've seen because the effect is accomplished so organically and realistic looking that you're like, I literally think I just saw a dude's head rip off of its own body, sprout legs and antenna, and walk off. Like, it is, everything is achieved again through Botine's amazing effects, Cundy's amazing lighting, and everything that Carpenter does to fit all those elements together. And yeah, I remember him specifically referencing that, and I'm like, yeah, that's one of the most effective moments. That chest chomping scene, transitioning into the spider head monster, is incredible. I also love, it's prior to that, if I'm not mistaken, who's the ginger with the bald head? He's got the big parka. His character name escapes me at this moment. But when he is mid-transition out in the snow, and it's
not Fuchs, because Fuchs is the one that
Fuchs
burns
is the
himself.
glasses with the full beard, yeah.
He burns himself to save himself.
But yeah, that moment though, where they catch him mid-transition, and at first you're like, oh, it's him, and they're like, no, it's not him, and slow pan back, and you see the crazy ass arm attached to him, and that just like
it's yelling and whatnot,
and like that. Oh my god, that is one of the most unsettling, like bone chilling moments in the entire movie. And
well, it plays to the thing itself, because in some of the stuff I watched, they talked about there were scenes where like some of these guys were gonna get like one of the guys got murdered by like being strangled, like stuck with something and strangled when he was going to look at the dogs, and another one of them wound up impaled by a shovel on the back of a door. And they kind of thought about like, this thing isn't a murderer, it literally wants to blend in and hide.
Right.
So most of you never see anybody get overtaken,
there's never-
except for Blair in the end. When Blair comes back in the end, you don't see anybody physically with the thing, and that, I mean, that adds to who's who. But this thing does not want to, like a Frankenstein monster, and I don't think Frankenstein monster
it
wanted to hurt
doesn't
anybody,
function like a traditional horror movie as much as it's not something stalking them. Like, all the interaction with it is it trying to evade and not be discovered.
Yeah, because from there you get to when you're talking about when he because we have the dog scene, and then we have the scene where they can't find Fuchs and they realize he burned himself, and then once whoever that is, the ginger guy, once ever he dies, McCready basically says like, this thing doesn't want to get us, it wants to hide.
Yeah, we
And
gotta
I know
burn
I'm
it
still
all. It's
human.
that the remains are still. They
Yeah.
discovered that the remains still.
I know
are
I'm
active.
still
Yeah.
human, and if you are all this thing, then you just attacked me right now. So some of you are still human too. So we got to watch our backs. Watch the guy you're with. Only eat your own food made out of only out of cans. Make your own food, And we get to my favorite, and this just kind of to me speaks to the kind of like terror that I appreciate, is when they're all standing outside, and I think they've put Blair away.
Yes,
Blair
at this
goes
point,
crazy.
Mr. Wilford Brimley has lost his shit.
Very much so. But yeah, so Wilford Brimley goes crazy, and once they subdue him, Hopper, the big sheriff guy, he kind of says, maybe I'm not fit to be the leader, and they kind of have a power struggle, who's going to do it, and Childs steps up and says, I'll do it, and McCready basically says, nah, and Clark, with a knife, basically says like, hell you will. Like, him and Childs kind of have a thing back and forth. And McCready says, I'm the least tempered of it. Like, I'll be in charge now.
Right.
And so they agree to put Blair out in his shop, lock him in it where he can't leave. And there's a scene, which is my favorite scene in the movie. They're all standing around out there, and he says, okay, you guys go back to the house, or you guys go back to the main base camp, yada, yada, yada. Me and, I don't know TK Carter's character name, I really should, we're going to go out to my shop. And he says, what for? And he's like, because when I left, I turned the lights off, and the lights are still on at McCready's place.
Yep.
And this is after you've gotten the, like, iconic, like, him telling everybody what's going on, leaving the recording deal. But it's just the creepiness of, like...
If you weren't my brother, I'd be really upset, because I was about to bring that up at some point, because that is my share. I don't know if we've discussed this, probably have prior, but that's my favorite single scene too. And for me, that's when the movie's firing on all cylinders and really has you, because if that line of dialogue and that quick cut to his shed with the light on scares you more than anything you've seen in the movie thus far or in the rest of it, that truly means that the whole setup of paranoia and
not trusting
that unease of
yeah.
like, who is around me, that element is working for you in the movie. And that again is what I talk about with this movie. Works on a lot of different levels. It has amazing effects that totally wow you, but it's that deep-seated paranoia and the way that those characters kind of play off each other, and the not knowing and questioning each other is so brilliantly threaded that it really starts to seep into you if you're watching it. And the isolation is another huge part of that. They set up very early on, just where they are located, the amount of snowfall, all of that stuff. And I can't really think of another movie other than my favorite horror movie of all time, The Shining, that does such a great job of setting up very matter-of-factly and, very concisely from the jump, the spatial relations of everything, all the sets that you're gonna see, the entire space that this action is gonna take place in, and you immediately know that there's no getting out of it. Just that impending doom and dread of like, we are trapped here, there is no escape. Something wants to kill us. We have to deal with it somehow. And I feel like that's why those are two that are very, very high on my list. Again, Shining's my favorite thing. Probably overall might be like my 3rd or 4th favorite horror movie. And that's, again, a huge part of it. And what we should talk about that a little bit, because I feel like the effects themselves, again, they're not scary to me. Even watching them as a kid, it was more of like a wow factor of like, whoa, that's nuts, or that's
Yeah.
crazy, or I've never seen anything like that before. And you know, it's more the times I've gone back to it, and it's been a kind of a gradual reveal to me, and I think that's why it's grown higher and higher in my list of Carpenter films. Is it really wasn't until I had been really deep into film and kind of just exploring it more that the character work in it comes through to me, and all of that slowly threaded and the mysterious elements of just not knowing where characters are and everything. That's the thing I love about it, and it being more of a slow burn. It's probably Carpenter's longest movie, if I'm not
Yeah, I
mistaken.
definitely feel like
It's a little
it's
over
his,
2 hours,
yeah.
and it's from the jump. There's some serious stuff going on, and it's not a slow burn because you get these steady reveal and these great set pieces
Oh,
of
yeah.
like creature effect after creature effect. But it's the times in between where things are breathing or whatever, where you're just like, who's gonna turn next? I don't know. Like, it feels like anything could happen to any of these guys at any moment, and
I mean, you
that
get it.
level of tension is just really hard to achieve, and especially on multiple rewatches. But every time, that's how I know it has hooked me in again. Is I'm right there with them, and like,
And just
oh, is this it?
the
Is this it?
scene where the scene after that where TK Carter comes back is like, I cut him loose. What? And
Yeah, and we
he's
don't
got
see any
McCready.
of that sequence.
He's got McCready's
stuff.
underwear, which they think, okay, if it cuts through your clothes, which it kind of sets up that whole theory McCready may be the thing, but
Right.
it sets, I think it may shred through your clothes because they found Fuchs's clothes
Mm-hmm.
when it was trying to change and all that. And so, they basically like would lock him out. They basically try and lock him out. And they're like, well, what if we're wrong? Well, then we're wrong. Like if we're wrong and he's not,
Yeah,
oh,
it's
well,
gotten to that point
it's gotten to
where
the point
it's
where it
like,
doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. We're going to lock him out to keep us safe. And of course you get that. One of my favorite shots is the door latch turning for him to come
because
in.
we don't know who that could be McCready, but we still don't know. Yes, he does break in like shortly afterwards.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But he breaks in with a flamethrower and a thing of dynamite. Like, and you touched me, we're all going. Like, that's how crazy it's gotten. Like, that's
And-
where it, comes.
Yep, that's
comes
where it
to a
really
head.
turns. And honestly, it feels like he's starting to come to the realization that like none of us are going to survive this. Like the main thing that's of importance here is that this thing doesn't survive. Like it's going to try and freeze itself, all this stuff. But that scene with him coming back in leads to arguably the greatest set piece in the entire movie. It's a scene that's been referenced and everything.
Yeah.
From South Park has great bits about the thing, but yeah, it is the blood test scene. We were waiting to get to it a little bit, but this is the most tense thing in the entire movie.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It's just, and it's so brilliantly played because there's reveals of like, well, this person, like they find out that Clark, who it was like, oh, of course he's one, wasn't one at all. It was just trying to defend the dog, like just natural human instinct of like not wanting this animal to get hurt or not being able to process like this is not a dog, this is an entity from another planet.
Yeah,
like you
the one
can't
who's
look
had
at
the
it
most
this way.
exposure to it, and then literally, and the actor plays him, talks about it, it's like, it's so shitty how I die in the movie. Like it's nothing. He tries to rush McCready, and McCready shoots him point blank.
Because what else would you do in this
Exactly.
scenario?
And so when they go back and they're doing the blood test, he tests Clark and nothing happens. Because
Yeah,
the
and
idea here is that if one piece of the thing is all like just one on a cellular level, it can be the entire thing. A little bit of blood would be part of the whole organism. So he devises this idea that we'll heat up the blood and we'll poke it with a hot needle. And if it has a reaction, then we'll know who's the thing.
It's trying to save itself, essentially.
It will try. Yeah, it'll try and save itself. And of course, he goes through. He says, "I'll tell you what I already know," and he does it to the blood that he drew himself. And you realize McCready at this point is not the thing. He is not one.
But there is also, of course, the argument that McCready has set up the blood test. Well, he does have an assistant, essentially, I guess, for impartiality. But I was going to say there is the argument that like he could have switched the blood or like made sure it wasn't his.
But they
that he was
also, or
actually
the fact that since he knows what he's doing, he knows it's coming, and
Right.
not that. But the thing is like if he's the thing, and he doesn't have that reaction, why would the thing that has the reaction, why would that reaction happen? Now,
Right.
granted, this all happens after one of the best, if not the best, reveals, cuts, whatever you want to call it, and that Norris goes into cardiac arrest
Mm-hmm.
while they're all deciding like what to do, while McCready's got him or whatever, like, held hostage what he's going to do. And they go to revive him, and every fucking time it doesn't, because it doesn't matter how many times you watch it, you get to count out every time it happens. When he goes back for clear and that stomach opens up and chomps on his hands, and then everything just starts to flapping and flailing around like it does, dude. Like that's that shit, man. And it's fucking great.
That is the moment that famously Guillermo del Toro talks about people just like losing their minds in the theater that he saw it in Mexico City. And he said it was just like a religious experience for him. He had never seen anything like that. And that was his like, I want to make movies. Like that was his moment in the way that we talk about Rodriguez watching New York as a kid. But yeah, dude, that chest chomp is just so incredible. This is a good, I'll jump in with probably my last Botine story. So they had Charlie Hallahan in his neck and arms, that's him. Everything else you see in that sequence is like plaster cast and everything rigged to open. So they do it the first time, and apparently, like, the tendrils that you described coming out, it basically came out like a fountain. He describes it looking like a Vegas fountain, and, like, just the effect did not work at all, and it was like a one-time thing, because, again, it tears open. It's like an internal mechanism that tears the stomach open that they had built, and so apparently the effect goes off, like, it looks ridiculous, and he talks about Carpenter, like, just being like, and thank you very much, Mr. Botine, like, after it ends, and him immediately being like, oh my god, like, we're gonna have to set up this whole thing. Apparently, Charlie Hallahan spends, like, most of this shooting day stuck in that rig, but when they break away to do the head detaching itself, obviously that's not Charlie Hallahan in that shot, it's just an effects puppet, but there's guys in the base of the table that are, like, pumping it out and have all these tubes and stuff, and the like stringy green, like viscousy textured stuff that they went in there, apparently just like melted plastic and gum and like all this terrible toxic shit. And they're about to film it, and Carpenter is like, hey, we need fire in here, because it's like McCready's using the flamethrower, so in this shot, like, we should have some flame beneath the frame. So they go and grab a flame bar, and they're about to light it and light it and light it. Finally, it sparks, and apparently, just the whole set goes up like immediately. And they said it was a very confined space, and they've got like a bunch of their crew in there. Put everything out. Everybody's still alive, thankfully. And he said it looked like a cartoon, like they're all covered in like black soot and stuff. And yeah, again, had to reset all of that. So that famous scene that you see is the second takes, like both times, and thank God they got it. But and again, the other side note that I will bring up, apparently on post in this movie, and just him trying to hit all these effects and being a young man, like, apparently he essentially lived on the Universal backlot for like a year straight trying to finish this thing, and just like working day and night. Almost killed him. Like, he had health problems, all sorts of stuff, like exhaustion. But it cannot be denied what he put on the screen for its day still stands the test of time. And again, it's just even more amazing to me that he was only 22 when he did that shit. So that'll be my final shout out to Rob Botine.
You always work for the job you want.
Yeah.
Work for the next job.
Exactly. Yeah. We've hit most of the big creature effects. That's why I feel like we'll wrap up with him. But as we kind of settle into the back half of the movie, it's a lot of cat and mouse and distrust. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so we come back to the second half of the blood test scene, which we haven't gotten to yet, because it's interrupted by all of that.
The spider thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So you get back, and he's one by one is...
and it's almost like you're not expecting another effects beat
no,
there,
not at all,
because you've just had such an astounding one. And that's why I feel like it's even more effective at catching you off guard because just like
I mean, he pans
yeah.
to everyone's face, and you think, okay, usually the third or first or fourth person, what's going to be that. He's already had one. Windows has already been cleared. Like Windows is
Right.
good, so he lets Windows get the flamethrower, and of course, one does it. The next one that does it, he hits it, and the blood itself jumps out of the petri dish, and God, who is Palmer? Is that his name?
Yes.
Palmer. Yeah. Palmer just starts again twitching and flailing, and like here we go again, and so much that like his head opens up and he chomps Window's face. It picks
There's
Windows
that great
up.
like ragdoll shot, but one of the more wonky effect shots, but I still love it, of just like the ragdoll body
Yeah.
inside the half like chompers and everything. Yes,
Yeah.
just crazy stuff.
And then
Crazy
probably my second favorite of the movie. I know that you gentlemen have been through a lot, but I do not. But what does he say? But you please, I do not want to spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch.
Yeah. Oh my god. Yes, great delivery.
It's fucking dude. So we've kind of all figured out who's who and who's not, and they basically. They have to go. Do they have to go out? They're gonna go test Blair. They're gonna go see what they're gonna
I think
go.
that was the idea, but basically they find that he is not in his shed anymore.
No, he has actually like tunneled and started to build another spacecraft.
Yes, which we kind of glossed over the whole sequence where they go out and discover the craft in the ice. Again, I'll shout out the matte paintings and that, because apparently they achieved it with like very little on-set stuff. A lot of it was done in post. But it's flawless as far as I'm concerned. Even on a Blu-ray transfer, like
the
Blu-ray still holds up
really
today.
Great.
Just gorgeous photography up there in general. And again, there's something about like a snowy atmosphere, with like this and The Shining it's just creepy. It's just moody, and immediately makes you think of Isolation. More modern day. The only thing I can really not a spectacular movie overall, but like 30 Days of Night does a really good job playing with like the snowfall being a like ominous thing. So yeah, now maybe we can start to dip into the ending, which is one of my favorites.
Bleakest of all time.
And so McCready has stepped up. We know he's the dude who's gonna handle shit at this point, and eventually he's confronted with basically the Wilford Brimley monster, what Blair looks like now, and it's pretty intense. There's that awesome sequence with like it rolling under the boards, the floorboards, and like he jumps over it. Yeah. But all of that, so huge kind of action set piece finale, blows up the thing.
Yeah, fuck you too.
Great last. Oh my god! Just Kurt Russell as McCready. I feel like we haven't even done it enough justice, but it goes without saying. I just I love him as an actor in anything, but these Carpenter performances, they're so effortlessly badass to me, and I feel like that's why they're so badass. He's not, again, it's not that like 80s macho machismo, like there's not a ton of one-liners and stuff. Like he feels like a real dude in a heightened circumstance who's just gonna deal with it, and I like that like pragmatic aspect of a protagonist as opposed to a hulked out action hero.
Wasn't a beard like kind of a signifier that you were gay back in the day at some point?
I feel like coming out of the 70s, any kind of big mustachioed maybe, I don't know.
So basically, you probably have a reading of this where people are like, oh, it's about like homophobia and like the isolation of who's gay and who's not gay.
Carpenter vaguely references AIDS. Like you could look at the virus or the alien entity and not knowing who has it, and the terrifying nature of that. Something that comes internally that you don't have like control over. And anyways, okay, so let's get back to the ending, and we'll talk about how this is kind of the first chapter in the Apocalypse trilogy. We'll get into that in just a sec. So, blows up the final creature, and we're left at this point. We got McCready and we got Childs, played by Keith David, who's been
MIA
since he's been gone for a little bit. So we're not sure what's going on with either of these guys.
Yeah, we should make it clear they all agree that they need to basically they need to blow. They plan to blow this thing up. They're basically like, you know what? This thing wants to retreat into the cold. We got to destroy
Let's light
everything.
things up around here. And
Yeah.
so they basically set fire to the entire base, thinking that if we can't make it out of this thing, at least we can prevent this thing from going to Earth. Because they establish earlier in the film, if this thing makes it to a populated area, like
27,000 hours.
it's like,
or no,
that's
2,700.
it. There's no fighting this thing back. So it's literally like they are the last line of defense. And I kind of love, that's just something I like in narratives in general, but people kind of accepting their fate and knowing that, like, okay, I'm not going to make it out of this, but I can save like a ton of other people or do kind of like a selfless act. That's a really cool thing for your protagonist. So we are left with Childs and McCready, and we get into just might be my favorite Carpenter ending of all time. We will definitely do an episode specifically about the endings, but they kind of have a brief dialogue with each other. If it's like, I don't know if you're who you say you are. I don't know if you are. And Kurt Russell just says, how about we just wait around, see what happens. And they're sitting there like chugging some whiskey back and forth. Go ahead and give me your fan theory in just a second. But we fade to black with this ambiguity of, is our faithful protagonist, was he the thing all along? In this final moment, has he turned in his contact with Blair? Is Childs the thing and he's about to turn him into it? Are they both human and they're just going to die, but they save the day? But that not knowing, and cue the incredibly moody score from Ennio Morricone again to take us out, and you're left with one of the bleakest, most unsettling endings to any movie. And so the whole, if I'm not mistaken, I think you're looking this up as we're speaking, but the whole basic theory is that the bottle at the end, the liquor bottle, is actually filled with gasoline.
Because it was supposed to be a Molotov cocktail that they were going to use.
And basically, he makes Child's taste, or he tastes, I forget.
Childs drinks it.
Right.
And he just kind of smiles. Because he says, I don't know if you're who you say you are, but neither of us is in any condition to try and worry about it right now. Let's just sit here and see what happens. And so Childs drinks it. And when he does, McCready kind of has this
slight smirk,
like he's like, shit, yep, you know what, I was gonna make a Molotov cocktail out of that, but I didn't. So that's pure gasoline in there, and Childs just drank it like it was nothing.
And if you were a human being, you would not be able to do that.
You would spit it back up.
Yeah, I love that theory, but it can't be understated. What I love about the movie more than anything is that you do not know. And as fun as it is to speculate over whether he was it the entire time, who was maybe it at different points in the movie before it was revealed to you, and I love the way the editing just plays around with that, and just the where characters are throughout the movie. But yeah, I love that you don't know. I would never want to have a confirmed thing. Apparently, they did shoot an ending because it was thought that maybe this would be a little bit too bleak of a way to go. But the original ending apparently shows McCready getting out to safety. He's the lone survivor, and as I understand, there's not even like a passing like, ooh, last minute scare or like unsettling ending where, oh, maybe he is still the thing. It's just like, no, he made it out of the situation. He's fine. It shows you that he survived. So apparently they shot this. It does exist somewhere. I think you can find it online. It may be on some of the DVD releases or Blu-ray. But I'm so glad that it ends where it does, and I understand that it's as bleak as you can get for a studio movie, even in that era, and kind of surprising that they let him keep it, honestly. But again, it goes down as one of my favorite endings to any movie, and definitely up there for his endings, which are all fantastic, as we've discussed. So I think it goes without saying, I alluded to as much beforehand, this is a 5 out of 5 for me. This is my all-time favorite Carpenter film. I feel like it works on every level. You've got awesome effects, great just array of character actors. You got Kurt Russell, who you can't go wrong with. Great setting, great just mood and feel to the entire proceedings. Like it's terrifying on an intellectual level and a conspiratorial level, and then it also has these awesome effects that just blow you away. I love everything about it. It gets more and more rich for me every time I rewatch it. I feel like I find like a little element that I didn't get before. And again, I like that it's lengthy in the way that like The Shining is. The Shining is a movie that I also feel like I get more and more out of every time I watch it because it just kind of lulls you in with its pace and um yeah. So 5 star for me.
Yeah,
How about you,
it's
brother?
my 5 star too. Before we I give you mine, we're gonna go back to the ending real quick. Apparently, that Dean Cundy and John Carpenter discussed doing some kind of camera trick to cue you in on who the thing was. And Dean Cundy says if you notice in each one of the shots where the thing is there, the tip off is there's like a glint or a gleam in their eye, like an eye line.
Uh huh.
And so he says, that's something to look out for when we see that. So I'm going to play this final scene and I'm going to look and see if I can tell who's who.
The only one. Did you kill it?
Feel free to watch along with us, folks.
Where were you, Charles? Thought I saw Blair. I went out after him. Got lost in the storm. Fire's got the temperature up all over the camp. Won't last long, though. Neither will we. How will we make it? Maybe we should. If you're worried about me. If we've got any surprises for each other. I don't think we're in much shape to do anything about it. Well, what do we do? Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
Pick up on anything?
No glints, but you definitely see that McCready hands him the bottle, same bottle of JB he's been drinking. Same bottles he's made Molotov cocktails out of. And he just kind of smiles and looks at him and just kind of sits there. And then we get the last shots of the bass, but then you have that score.
Yeah. There we go. And yeah, that concludes, again, I'd like to get into this for a little bit, what Carpenter refers to as the first chapter in his Apocalypse trilogy. So apparently this also includes Prince of Darkness, which we'll get to in a couple episodes, and also In the Mouth of Madness, which is a personal favorite of mine. And he talks about, I think you probably have a little bit more detail on this than I do, but so he talks about the thing as being, it's an internal threat that leads to, it's something that comes from within that leads to the end of things. And Prince of Darkness, it's the end of God. Obviously, Satan comes back in that movie. And then In the Mouth of Madness is the end of reality. And we'll get into what exactly that means when we get to the movie. But setting that up, again, we've come off of a bleak but fun kind of winking at the camera style ending with New York, which again is pretty nihilistic, but doesn't feel nearly as dark because of the movie that's preceded it. This definitely it's so unsettling, and it accomplishes what I really want any horror movie to do. As much as I like the final scares, like there's great movies that have final jump scares or little twist moments, or like, oh, the evil's still around, but I love stuff that keeps that theme of like the evil hasn't gone or whatever, or you haven't quite mastered, or you think you did, but really leaves it to like tick in your mind of like what would happen. And like that's what's beautiful about the Thing storyline. We've seen now a remake that kind of tells the Norwegian story beforehand, not very successfully in my opinion, and then the video game, which I think is pretty interesting, that came out. It's like early 2000s ish. It was like original Xbox, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
I think original Xbox PS.
I'd love to get an HD update of that, but basically that storyline takes place after the events of the original. So if you kind of thread all three of these together, you have this great narrative of this base camp and this alien entity. But I would love to, I'd love to actually see that game redone more in the vein of like Heavy Rain or Until Dawn, where it's like decision based. Because if I remember correctly, like you had the illusion of like, oh, you can test this guy or test this guy, like members of your party, to see if they were going to turn, and like some of it was based on how you interacted with them. But I've seen things subsequently that apparently that wasn't an actual algorithm in the game, and it's like the people that were going to turn were always going to turn regardless of how you play it.
Yeah,
So
it
it's
didn't
kind
matter
of
whether you
bullshit.
it didn't matter whether you kept them on
So
your side and gave them guns and
yeah,
ammo. It was, they were going to turn regardless.
I would love to see a reworking of that, because again, it's such an awesome concept. And if you remove a little bit more of the player agency and it's more of just like playing through a narrative, like I said, somewhere like Until Dawn or something, and you could have so many like non-binary choices for like, okay, well, if you interact with this person here, then maybe they're not the Thing here, but they have a possibility to be later. I feel like that would be such an interesting concept to explore in games, and I know Carpenter's open to it because again, they licensed the Thing, and he did work on Fear, if I'm not mistaken, or the
Yeah, the
third
Fear
one.
games. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, I think that kind of comes from his son. I'm pretty sure his son is the one who was responsible for pushing him towards doing that. But yeah. So I'd love to see that reworked as a game. But back to what I was saying, I love that it leaves you just constantly spinning in your head with like, okay, what's the next step? If McCready is the Thing, or if not, does this Thing die here? And just kind of imagine like what would happen if we saw a sequel down the road, if it had ever gotten made, that was like this same concept, this same sort of entity, but it comes to a highly populated area, or it's just like in a city, or it's, any, just possibilities are endless. And it's such a great core concept of a creature that I haven't really seen replicated or anything close to it that I can think of.
No, I can't come up with anything that's replicated it at all.
And again, that goes back to Botine having that initial concept of why can't it be anything, and I love that. I feel like the possibilities would be endless for re-exploring that. But I do love the setting, so I would definitely want that retained. I feel like the whole Antarctic base is part of what really makes the movie sing. But let's maybe get into the remake a little bit. It's a prequel.
Yeah, it's a technical prequel. It's still entitled The Thing.
And who do we have? Mary Elizabeth Winstead. Is Joel Edgerton in that movie?
Yeah, he is.
Okay. And I've seen it one time. All I really remember is that the last like 5 minutes is fantastic because it threads perfectly into the original. Like you could watch them back to back. Unfortunately, the movie that comes before it, I don't remember having any lasting impression of it other than I didn't like the effects, similar to my issues with the Fog remake. And yeah, honestly don't remember much else about it other than she was kind of like a female McCready, which I didn't really understand because it was supposed to be the Norwegian base, but we had a bunch of Americans in the cast, and I like almost feel like it would have been cool to have a subtitled like told like all in Norwegian version, like unknown cast or something. But yeah, not a fan of that one. What you looking at, brother?
I'm looking at the ending just to see um, the Thing in the form of Lars, the deceased dog, runs to the camp.
You're reading the ending for the remake, or the prequel rather.
Yeah, and basically, okay, yeah, all right. When I first watched it, for some reason I thought Mary Elizabeth Winstead made it out, but it literally is just two dudes at the end. Because for some reason, I thought like, oh, and I have to go back and watch it.
On the chopper.
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
I mean, it's
I can't-
it
again,
Rogue
I can't
One's
really
it, and I do
remember-
love that.
yeah.
It Rogue One's the shit out of it,
Can't
like
really
right up to the
remember
last minute.
how it gets there, but I just know that it did get there.
It's basically the same thing. They just like it's. I don't know if they go to. I have to watch it again. I don't because I watched it in parts too. I didn't give it a full.
We'll go ahead and
watch.
say at some point that'll be on the homework list too. We'll do a more proper discussion of it, just because
When
I
we
want to
look at the
see
remakes.
how it functions as a prequel. And again, if anybody from I don't even know if Universal's gaming label exists anymore. I think it was Vivendi Universal for a little bit.
Yeah.
But whoever has the rights to that, let's get an HD update of the Thing game because it was a fun time. I think you get some of the original score in there. And I don't know if Carpenter had any.
He does a voice. His voiceover
he's like
cameo.
a radio opera or something in there. But
And McCready is.
yeah, I just want to play through that again. And it's one of those like it's hard. There's no access to it unless you have.
Even if they could just let you
Xbox.
download it on PS4,
Yeah,
that'd be
no,
great.
I just want like a digital version of it, even if it's not HD update. I want to play it again because in my memory it was really really good, but I don't ever remember beating it. That's the other.
Me
thing.
neither, yeah.
So, yeah. So let's talk a little more broadly. I will say, we've talked generally about every one of them of like what we would do to recast. The Thing is one that I never want to
I'm
be
not touching.
remade.
I will not touch it.
We can talk like I wouldn't fuck with the story structure at all. We can talk just like fan wise about who we would maybe cast if we had to recast it modern day. But I don't ever want The Thing to be remade. I remember when they announced that one, and I was like, oh well, it's a prequel. I like that they're at least playing with the narrative a little bit. But it essentially boils down to being a remake of The Thing that's moves way too fast, has a bunch of CG effects that wouldn't hold up like a year later, and as I remember, like no real legitimate scares of the psychological variety or the jump scare variety. So, yeah, incredibly hard role to recast. But if you had to pick one actor to play McCready, we don't have to do the whole cast, but just who would you sub in? And again, we had a general discussion about Snake on a prior episode. I feel like McCready kind of still fits into that. Like maybe he should be American, even though we were throwing out like Dan Stevens for Snake.
I cannot think of one. This is the only movie that we'll do this with that I cannot think of one because it's just so perfect.
I think
with who does it.
Maybe we'll leave it at that because I have nothing that's coming to mind for that one. And yeah, it would almost feel like blasphemy to suggest that anything should be messed with because I think again it is an unequivocal masterpiece. If you for some reason never seen this one or avoided it for some reason, again, it's my favorite Carpenter movie. I love Halloween. I adore it. But I feel like this is him at the height of his powers, firing on all cylinders. And on top of that, he has just a great support system beneath him of hugely talented individuals, whether it be the fantastic ensemble cast, his, camera department, his makeup effects department. Everybody's just doing top-notch work.
Except
and
for Universal. Because
yes,
they fucked him over.
I was going to say, except for
this.
everybody else surrounding it, because we got to get into a sad note. It's his biggest budget. He gets 15 mil to go make this thing with. And it only makes back 13.7. God knows what they spent on marketing on top of that.
Nothing.
On that.
Apparently
15.
it was nothing because what you find in what I was finding was that if you listen to the thing about the men of the men of
Outpost, Outpost 3.
That one. Basically, at the time, Universal was sinking a lot of money into their Cat People remake.
Directed by Paul Schrader, which I actually watched for the first time this past Halloween. That's one of our mom's favorites, side note.
And so, because of that, they needed something to... I don't know. I don't remember exactly what was said. But basically, the Cat People remake that came out in 1982, it was...
That's what they decided to throw their money behind.
That's what they did because it was made for 12 and Cat People made 21, so they kind of pushed that as opposed to The Thing. And of course the big, the big elf, which, I mean, that had come out in April. So you have this in June. But what happens 2 weeks before is E.T. E.T. comes out. It's the kid-friendly alien one.
I've heard Carpenter jokingly refer to as just like, it was the absolute wrong time. People were coming off of this cute family, and E.T. has
Alien
its
in the
dark
woods.
moments and stuff, but like, yeah, he's a cutesy alien. And then we show them this like vicious, grotesque, like just horrible thing. Sorry, I have to throw it in there because I've forgotten to mention it up to this point, but one of my favorite quotes, I think this was actually in the 100 Greatest Horror Scenes that Bravo did like years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Great series.
I remember watching those with you.
Those are really fun. But Carpenter's talking about a conversation that he had with Stephen King, and Stephen King, arguably a master of horror in his own right. And they're talking, and King says, the old adage in Hollywood is you never show the monster. You always keep it hidden in shadow, or you make reference to it or whatever. He said, unless the thing you have, like the effect, the creature, whatever, is so compelling and so astounding that you can't help but show it. And that's basically like, Carpenter coming off of Halloween, where Michael's hidden in the shadows and is this ominous figure that's looming over everything. And to transition into this where it's like, no, these effects are like right in your face, and like they're still elegantly lit to like hide some of the rubber qualities of them and everything, but it's mind-blowing. And I do not know what people made of it at the time, just because it really was a huge step forward, especially for a mainstream like studio release, to have again that level of effects, but also the darker aspects of the story as a whole. Yeah. I feel like it just turned people off in general.
Well, see, and I also think you're seeing it at the wrong time. I mean, yeah, Paranormal Activity came out in the summer. Yeah, Halloween came out before Halloween. But I think if you push it back, give it a little bit more time to throw some posters up.
This is a late October, November movie.
Yeah, like, and see, I don't know, and see, here's the thing: you don't know who. I never really got into that back in the day. I know now, but like a lot of big stuff comes out end of summer, August, September, October, even in November before, Christmas. But you throw it on like in October when it's cold outside. You give it a couple more months of putting billboards up, letting people know what's going on with it. Getting it to tie into the fact that it's Kurt Russell and John Carpenter again, and all this kind of stuff, giving people time to forget about E.T. And it would go back up. It would go against Halloween 3, which John Carpenter was, part of. But if you push it back just to October and release it, I think you got a whole new trajectory career-wise, because he says, he takes failure to heart a lot of the times, and that was one of the worst ones up until that point. And he took it really hard, and he didn't work for a while after that.
And it's really a shame because he seemed incredibly satisfied with this one. For all intents and purposes, he made the movie he wanted to make, one that was much more true to the original source material, Who Goes There, more so than the Howard Hawks version, which obviously he was a huge fan of. But he said from the jump, like, he didn't want to just remake that movie. He wanted to do his own thing. And as it stands, I mean, we didn't really talk about this in the content, but it is a remake in and of itself. Yeah, it is. And arguably, possibly the greatest horror remake in the history of horror cinema, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of people throw that right up there as well. Some people would argue The Fly as well, Cronenberg's The Fly. But, it's top notch. I feel like he was very, very satisfied and happy with it. And it's just so shitty that, it was not received that way at the time. And I feel like this was the start of that happening consistently throughout his career.
And the other thing we should mention too,
from this point on, he's just a few steps ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, because also on the same day that this movie was released, Ridley Scott's Blade Runner gets released.
Yeah, another movie not appreciated in its own time at all.
But now it's like an icon, exactly. And like the music and the sets and all that for Blade Runner, people go back to all the time for sci-fi. So I don't think putting it up against another sci-fi movie and then making it in June as well, I think you let Blade Runner do its thing. You push it back to to later in the year, and I think you got a whole new game. I think people appreciate it more.
Yeah, I like this one. So we're not advocating for trying to mess with the original at all or like remake it. We
Just
just
mess with the
wish we could
original release.
retroactively fix the release because
Yeah.
that's the, and of course it became a huge cult movie. Video like saved this movie, and it's obvious. I feel like over time it has built as much. We talked about cultural relevance with Halloween and like whether you can ever replicate something like that. And I feel like this and Escape are probably in a lot of people's minds, if they kind of have just a general knowledge of Carpenter, those are kind of the three main ones that hopefully I would want them to know is Halloween, Escape from New York, and The Thing. I feel
And
like
I mean,
that
they're
gives you a
hallmark
nice
and game
sampling
changers of genre.
Yes.
Halloween is a hallmark and a game changer of the horror genre, just like this does wonders for sci-fi.
Yes.
I mean, I'm pretty sure, I'm not going to lie, I didn't look. I know Greg Nicotero worked a lot with Stan Winston, but you can't tell me that some of the guys working today did not see that as kids, or maybe even worked on it as kids and thought, holy fucking shit. You know, Tom Savini, I know, was a big deal with Night of the Living Dead, and then getting into the stuff in the early 80s, but there, you know, there were people who worked on that as kids, like, you know, like Rob, who grew up and now they're like, that's their gold standard. Like, that's how you can do it. And there is something to be said for the fact that it's rubber, glue, and a bunch of random shit as opposed to ones and zeros on a computer.
You know, not to sound like old farts or too pretentious in our own right, but I think we're both huge advocates for just like you're gonna throw, you know, $1 million or 50 million towards your computer effects budget. Take a third of that and throw it into a practical effects budget and see where you get from there.
Yeah.
Like I feel like it's so written off to begin with that like nobody, because either it's going to be too time consuming or whatever the justification is for not going that direction. It seems like it always has to be a director stepping up to be like, no, I want this to have this particular feel. This is who I want. I think about like Tarantino always hiring KMB for all of his like effects and stuff, and that's mostly just like very normal like human on human violence. It's not like crazy effects and stuff, but I'm like, he has those guys at his disposal for that. Like, why aren't more studio? I feel like it would be a money saver in most cases. Like, I don't know how the financials work out on that, but it seems like in a lot of cases, the effects budgets that are thrown into, you know, computer animation could be translated into physical effects and still get you a pretty amazing product.
Yeah, because I mean,
in
if
today's
you
day and age, because makeup effects are just even more astounding than they were then, and we're talking about how well these still hold up, and it's all about how you stage it and shoot it. And again, that goes back to Kundi's like amazing lighting that I feel like all
and
of
I
this
mean,
stuff still
if you've
really
got
holds
something
up.
there to look at, it's a little bit easier to rotoscope a wire out of something than it is to like create a 3D mat of it and like make it work with the environment.
I'm a fan also of like mixing the two together, of like having kind of a, you know,
a blended version of
which
that
Del
works.
Toro has tooled around with in like Pan's Labyrinth and stuff. But there's you cannot understate how important that like just textural feel to something. When something looks like, I can imagine that in a 3D space in front of me, like I can imagine what that would feel like or what it smells like or anything, like that is going to be 1,000 times more effective than me sitting there going like,
yeah, I mean, just
they made that
the
with ones
steam
and
and
zeros.
the
Just,
slime and the junk just oozing off
viscera.
of the of these things, and then like it's a dog head, and then it's like a flower spinning Venus flytrap thing, and it's like a weird monster dog.
Yeah, I would love. I'm sure if it doesn't exist, I would love for one to come out soon. I want like a nice giant coffee table book of like set photos and behind the scenes stuff, and just like even like fan art based on the creature designs and stuff. Like I love the visual look of this movie top to bottom, and yeah, again, it bums me out that we're talking about my personal favorite, and it's not a success for him. And this kind of Lee's definitely. I mean, he's got some of his most interesting films coming up for sure. And was Christine a studio picture? No,
I'm not sure.
I feel like it was like more small reserved budget, but I feel like it had like a more major release. And if I'm remembering correctly, I'll obviously do some research before we record. But Christine does kind of like tick. I believe Christine was successful upon release, so
Yeah,
probably gets him back into somewhat good graces. And you know, I didn't do a lot of research as far as how the studio as a whole felt like. Was it on him that it didn't work? Did somebody kind of step up and say, yeah, we kind of screwed the pooch on the marketing for this one? Don't really know what the dynamic was there, but obviously seemed like it kind of soured him as a first big studio experience. He seemed like he liked a lot of aspects of it and had an enjoyable time filming it, but maybe wasn't as thrilled with how it was received. And same thing for Kurt Russell too. He has a great bit in the Terror Take Shape documentary where he talks about, maybe I'm just destined to be in things that people don't find. And it's so funny because he's talking about like, and that's why I'm a really big fan of video and how that's come about. Like as video is almost still like a new thing when he's talking about it, but he's like, I really feel like that's where things like this are gonna find their audience because we're not making movies for just the people right at this time. We're making movies for as many people to see as possible. And he's like, and sometimes maybe it's better to not be clouded by like he even references like the politics of the time and like different shit like that. And I'm like, yeah, and I feel like he more than a lot of other actors has been a part of quite a few that found their legs later on. It's like everybody loves Kurt Russell. I feel like he's generally regarded as like this great like elder statesman of acting in general,
Yeah.
but it's all on the backs of like he's never. I mean, you got your Backdraft, you got your Tombstone, but I feel like a lot of it is on the strength of just like his DVD stuff. I'm thinking like Breakdown, probably not huge when it came out. Love that fucking movie. It's a great like early '90s thriller. Captain Ron, totally fun family movie. Like all of these that I feel like again are like huge for us, but just didn't quite hit in theaters. But he's had
Soldier.
so many of those. Um, yeah. So again, shout out to Kurt Russell. Shout out to John Carpenter. Love their collaborations together. This is my favorite. Like behind that, just on the basis of collaboration, I'm not saying just as movies. Big Trouble would be my next
Definitely.
collaboration, just because they seem like they were having just
A
the
fucking
most
blast.
fun ever making that movie. So that one's to come. But next week, we'll be getting into Christine. This one, it's gonna be a fun one. I love Christine. We got Carpenter adapting Stephen King. A great central performance from Keith Gordon. I almost said Stuart Gordon, but that's not correct.
Keith
That's
Gordon.
the director. But yeah, Keith Gordon, who is
And-
actually a director in his own right now. We'll talk about that next episode.
And like John Travolta's cousin, right? That's the villain.
Oh yeah. Looks
Fucking
exactly
wannabe Vinnie Barr or whatever.
exactly
Yeah.
like Travolta, and of course we'll get into
It's
that.
like they wrote it and like didn't like somebody had the idea for the script when the book came out, and they were thinking like maybe if Saturday Night Live
Yeah,
had not
also.
taken off, that he'd be the perfect for it. Or like I feel like it's like an extension of like maybe they didn't want him because he was in Carrie, and
It's
then
possible.
like
It's right
you
around,
know,
or not right around.
he was in Carrie, but it's like, oh man, he's
Mhm.
gonna be a Stephen King actor. But yeah, no,
I
Christine would be
rewatched
fun.
Christine this past Halloween. Love it regardless. But one of the things that like really stuck with me is I was watching it with Veronica. She hadn't seen it before, and she was like, "So all these high schoolers are like 35, right?"
Yeah,
I'm like,
totally. Yeah.
Literally, they're all supposed to be like juniors or seniors in high school, and they all look 35 years old,
Yeah.
except for Keith Gordon. But yeah. So looking forward to Christine. That's a huge fun one. But glad we got this one in the books. So yeah, we'll sign off. This has been Carpenter Revisited on the ARK of E Network. We've been talking about The Thing. I've been Noah.
And I've been Gavin.
And we've been the Blanchard brothers. So, you want to just hang around here for a little while and see what happens?
I think I'm going to bury this tape just so if we don't make it out, someone will know what happened here. Dum dum. Dum dum. Dum dum.
Thanks for listening, guys.
I'm gonna hide this tape when I'm finished. If none of us make it, at least there'll be some kind of record. Storm's been hitting us hard now for 48 hours. We still have nothing to go on. One other thing, I think it rips through your clothes when it takes you over. Windows found some shredded long johns, but the name tag was missing. They could be anybody's. Nobody trusts anybody now. And we're all very tired. Nobody trusts anybody now. Nothing else I can do. Just wait. R.J. McCready, helicopter pilot, U.S. Outpost number 31.